I'm Katie.
And I'm Steve, and this is the City of Reading podcast. Today, we're venturing into the often overlooked but vitally important realm of city code enforcement. In every city, there's a team dedicated to maintaining the standards that keep our neighborhoods safe, clean, and vibrant. And in Reading, that responsibility falls into the capable hands of the Code Enforcement Division.
We connect with Seth and Amanda from the Code Enforcement Division to learn about how and why this department is vital to the city. From tackling property maintenance issues to navigating complex zoning regulations, Reading's Code Enforcement Division is on the front lines, ensuring that our community remains a place we're proud to call home.
So whether you're a resident curious about the process or simply interested in a behind-the-scenes look at how code enforcement keeps our city running smoothly, this episode is for you.
I'm Seth Dressler, Code Enforcement Supervisor with the City of Reading. I oversee the Code Enforcement Division.
And my name is Amanda Lake, and I am the Development Services Technician for the Code Enforcement Division.
Thank you, Seth and Amanda, for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you. We're looking forward to learning more about code enforcement in general and what it is you guys do and how that impacts the community. So maybe we could just start there. High level, what exactly does the Code Enforcement Division do with the City of Reading?
Code Enforcement acts as sort of an ambassador between the public or the citizens in the community, be it business owners, property owners, visitors, and the city government itself. A lot of times what we're dealing with would be violations of code and law, which are commonly seen as nuisance activities, work without permits, some health and safety issues and things. So we like to work with the public to keep the community happy, healthy, and safe through collaboration and grace and compassion. A lot of times when people have code enforcement violations, they don't so much understand that they have done anything wrong, and they most likely have not ever done this maliciously. A lot of times code violations come out of neglect of property standards and just aging of infrastructure.
Given that code enforcement handles so many different things in the city, what's one of the most common things you get? What's the one of the things that you get over and over again?
We do tend to receive a more than often amount of junk, trash, and debris that are visible from someone's front yard or even backyard that can constitute some health and safety issues, as well as just blight. Of course, we very much are residents of the city as well, and we like living in a neighborhood where everyone takes care of their property and yard and respectfully is a good neighbor. So we like to also make sure that we're enforcing that when we receive those complaints. We do also tend to receive a lot of complaints on recreational vehicles, trailers, or boats that are parked within a front yard setback in a residential area. A lot of people are unaware that is a code violation. And what essentially that is your front yard setback is roughly about 15 feet from where your property lines start. And when you have a recreational vehicle, boat, or trailer parked in that is considered a code violation of our municipal code. So we notice people when a complaint is received and they end up, I've been parking my boat or RV here for 30 plus years and I was unaware. And a lot of the times it's one of those where with our division, we are charged with seeing through every complaint that's received when it falls under our jurisdiction. And so really what we try to do is just educate the community of these codes that exist and give them the time and tools to correct those so we can help make the neighborhood look nice, especially for people that appreciate when we can work with those property owners to come in compliant. Those are more common and not as severe as far as like on our triage list. We do also receive quite a few complaints of substandard tenant living condition. And we're big advocates on working with the tenants and property owners to help make the living conditions habitable, because of course these people that are paying rent and living in these conditions may not have the best communication with their property owner, property management. And so we help step in to help them come into compliance in that regard. And it's nice when we can get the property management company or property owners to realize the violations are existing and help them get compliant so that tenant can live in a better habitable condition in that sense as well. So those are some other ones that we tend to receive. And then another one that's also pretty common are inoperable vehicles that are parked in driveways. And a lot of people don't understand that a vehicle that's in a state of inoperability, which would be unlicensed, unregistered, flat tires, cobwebs visible on the vehicle, weeds growing up under the vehicle where you can tell it's obvious that the vehicle hasn't moved in quite a while, but ends up constituting blight on the neighborhood where the neighborhood looks relatively nice, or you can tell people really take care of their front lawns and yards. And then you have a little bit of a dilapidated car or a car with flat tires.
In that process, as a community member, to your point, Amanda, they might see one of these issues and wonder what they should do. Is their best bet just to go ahead and go to the City of Reading website and submit the complaint, regardless of whether they're sure if it falls within a certain ordinance or not? And I guess the second part of that question is, how do you then differentiate for those folks who may or may not know the difference between city code versus CC&Rs versus maybe HOA rules and regulations?
Yeah. So the nice thing is with our website being upgraded and new, we were able to apply more educational tools and handouts and information specifically on the code enforcement webpage. So we do really encourage people to read over our webpage and the handouts that are included on the webpage. We also have a really nice complaint directory that you can click on and review, and it really helps show you where your complaint would go if you're unsure, to make sure that it's not all just going to code enforcement. We do receive quite a few complaints that we do end up having to refer to other departments or divisions, or even to the county if it falls outside of city limits. We do receive a lot of complaints from people that may not live within city limits, and then we have to let them know to contact the Shasta County Code Enforcement. So our website is really great in that. So we really encourage people to read those first. However, at the end of the day, if you are unsure, we always just recommend to send us the complaint or fill out the complaint form, and we can filter it from there or reach back out to that person and let them know, hey, we forward this over to this department. Moving forward, if you have a similar complaint or this complaint continues to happen, you would want to reach out to this department specifically.
And to touch on, you had asked about CCRs and potentially other codes, which may or may not be enforced by us. We would also look into that complaint and speak with a person and educate them to say, this is not something that falls within our authority. This is something you have to speak with your homeowners association. Or again, like Amanda said, it might be a county code in which we're unable to enforce because they fall outside of the jurisdiction as well.
And then on that same submission process, I'm assuming many neighbors may want to maintain cordial relationships with their fellow neighbors. Can they submit these complaints anonymously, or do they need to provide their information? And would the neighbor who's having the complaint submitted against them, would they find out who submitted the original complaint?
So all complaints are received anonymously by the city. However, we really do to have the complainant's information for our division specifically. That way, if we have any concerns or questions, we can reach directly out to that person to try and gain a little bit more information. That is really helpful for us. We do very much understand that people may not have the best relationships with neighbors, especially if it's an ongoing nuisance issue. So we do take that confidentiality seriously. And we always make sure that they're placed anonymously once we open the complaint. And at that point, we're more or less considered the complaining party once we receive the complaint as the city. Yes. And we follow the government code, which states that complaints are considered confidential.
And I have two follow-up questions on the most common complaints that you receive. The first on RVs, boats, and trailers. I feel like that's a super common occurrence. I don't know. I feel like you could drive by any street in Reading and you'd see at least a couple. Is there like a time limit on it? Is it like 24 hours? Can they never be parked there? Is there any kind of, I could imagine that if neighbors wanted to, I don't know, go to war with each other, that could be a really easy way to do it.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of neighbor disputes regarding RVs, boats, and trailers in driveways, in the front yard, parked in front of the street. Typically, if you were in the process of loading, unloading your RV, having it in a driveway, while it would be technically in violation of the code at any given time that it's parked within that driveway, like I said earlier, we work in a spirit of collaboration with the community. That would be something that we would give some allowance to a person to do the regular activities of normal life by pulling their RV into the driveway and loading up the kids and the equipment that they need. But it's when it starts to sit for a day, a couple of days, where it starts to concern the other neighbors is really where, and that's where I'll jump back up and say, we really live in that balance as code enforcement. We operate in the balance between what's offensive to people, what's an actual tangible violation of law, and then all the intents that are around just the way that people live their life. And we can see that everybody needs to put their RV somewhere at some point to do something. So we're going to be very collaborative and compassionate about allowing them a little bit of time to do. We don't go patrolling for those things either. When complaints are lodged on RVs, we will go back and we'll respond with a letter. And we're hoping that it's cleared up voluntarily via letter. And then we'll go back and we'll check after a while. And if we see that RV is still there, and I think typically most of the time the RVs are gone by the time that we do send someone out to put eyes on that property. And that gives a lot of credence to the belief that people aren't doing these sort of violations maliciously. They're just trying to load the vehicles for a trip potentially.
Or they just may not be aware. And our biggest thing is we're big on just educating the community on what are some of the common code violations that tend to happen that people are just unaware of. And Seth was saying, when we first notice people. It's just a courtesy notice that just says, hey, this may be existing. If it is, we would like to give you a reasonable amount of time, which is typically 10 days to 2 weeks to correct that violation. And we get a lot of response back from property owners, which we're appreciative of. And that way we can have a conversation over the phone with them and explain the code violation to them, why it is a violation, and the best way to correct it. And then, of course, work with them on time frame that's reasonable for them as well as reasonable for the city and the complainant that submits their complaint. Because we do want our community to know that are submitting complaints, that we are seeing their complaints. We're working with the property owners to get compliance. And yeah, we like to work with those property owners when we end up opening a code case and notifying them, to work with them as best as we can and not be too harsh on the time frame, just to get compliance and gain a good relationship with the community.
It feels like laws are generally black and white, but it feels like this is a subjective area. One person's lawn ornament might be somebody else's trash. Like, how do you, if somebody has a bunch of things in their front lawn and they're considering it decoration, like, how do you draw the line between something that's blight or decoration, especially if it's coming from two different people's point of view?
Yeah, very carefully. We try to draw that line very carefully. I think overall is in the title of the officers that work in my division is neighborhood preservation. So we're going to take into account an overall picture of the neighborhood as a big limiting factor in what we will require to be changed or corrected or removed from that person's lawn. If you go into some neighborhoods where it's very typical that everyone has a very manicured, almost putting green style grass and the landscape that was put in when the developer built the properties, and then you come around the corner and you've got a person who has put in sheds in the front yard, or like you said, a ton of lawn ornaments and whatnot, they may or may not actually be a violation of the law. And then that's where these codes for nuisance allow for the articulation if it's offensive to the senses of people that live in the neighborhood. And that's where that balance really comes in, that collaborative effort, because anything can be offensive to anybody at any time, but is it really at the level that it should be removed or corrected? So much heed, care, and balance is taken into account when we do talk with the complainant who's having the issue as well. We also educate them that, sure, we could have, maybe they don't like a windmill or something in a front yard. And that's actually one that I've had before. Someone didn't like a windmill. It squeaked. And so part of the fix to that was the windmill itself wasn't a violation. However, I was able to go out and hear the squeaking off of the property, and therefore it did meet nuisance of some sound issues. So in working with the two property owners, because they had already had some beef, they already knew who was complaining on each other. I suggested that maybe every so often they put some axle grease up in there, and that tended to work. And I never heard anything back again. And that's a very low level type of violation that we would see. However, it shows that collaborative effort.
And if I can piggyback too, our code does more or less define junk, trash, debris. And that's also something that if it constitutes a fire hazard, it could harbor pests, rats, things of that nature, or just safety and health. If it ends up being like an overflow of trash, or maybe like a huge wood pile, or just a lot of miscellaneous items that may be just in one big pile, that of course can harbor pests and potentially cause a fire. So we look at things like that too, where if you just have a few miscellaneous items they look like they're in place and they're not actually defined as junk or trash or unused equipment, we really try to use the critical thinking of what the best way to approach this and what kind of speaks more to the code of, could this harbor pests given the nature of it? Could this be a fire hazard? Especially in the summertime, we understand people are very on high alert of that, and we are very aware of that as well. So that's a big, priority for us when we receive things of that nature that could be a potential fire or safety hazard. So I think when it really falls into that line, that's where we would be enforcing it more. But yeah, like you said, if it's just a few lawn ornaments or maybe more than a few lawn ornaments, but they seem in place, or we really try to be a little easier on people like that, because of course, if it's something that they care about and it doesn't look too crazy or constitute any issues like that, that's one that we would consider probably not hounding them on.
I'm trying to gain an understanding of how the process works. From what I understand thus far, maybe we use an RV as an example. If someone reports an RV in violation and the code enforcement team deems that, yes, it is in violation of the city code, an initial letter is sent. They're given a fair amount of time, whether that's 2 weeks or whatnot, to remedy that situation. Then what? Are there financial implications if they haven't yet remedied it? And then also, once that complaint is resolved, what's to stop that homeowner from bringing the RV back? Are there subsequent fines that come with that, or increased fines? Can you talk us through the process a little bit in that regard?
Sure. Initially, they're going to receive our courtesy notice, letting them know that, hey, in a friendly manner, hey, you've got a violation on the property. We're asking that you take some steps here to alleviate the issue over there. A lot of times that's a conversation with us. However, some of the larger issues, a lot of times junk trash debris, substandard conditions and stuff will largely, that correspondence will go unreturned, and we'll have to send out what we call a notice of violation. So that would be our typically our second to third letter, depending on the severity of the violation. Could also be the first letter that we send. If this is something that affects health and safety, we're going to start at a higher level. If this is something that's more purely aesthetic, a lower quality of life issue, we'll start at the more friendly letters. However, sometimes on these RVs that are in driveways, we don't get that return. And that person maybe wasn't just loaded up to go out on the weekend trip with the family. They may be living in it, or maybe it's broke down or something, and they otherwise have ignored us. So we'll send that notice of violation letter, and that gives them another length of time, typically 10 days as well, to come into compliance, or at least start a conversation with us as to the reasons why they may need more time to achieve said compliance. If that doesn't happen, we don't hear from them, the logical next step for us is to write a citation with a monetary fine attached to that. And the way that the monetary fines work is every day that something is in violation, it's considered a separate violation. We're not able, staff and manpower wise, to go out every day. However, every day that something is in violation, it would be right for a citation. Typically what we'll do is we'll write them a citation and give them more time to correct. Now, that's saying that most of the time this is going to be that RV that's not causing a lot of health hazards or safety issues. And we'll give them more time to correct. And typically what I have directed my officers on something like that, when you get to this level, you're going to get less than 10 days at this point. They've already probably gotten 20 to 30 days to get to this point. So we'll go through and we'll give a series of citations. And a lot of times 1 to 2 citations typically works on getting an RV out of a front yard setback or out of a situation where it's parked in violation. And then we do, from time to time, see recidivism on that, where somebody will bring that back and go ahead and reestablish that unpermitted use by parking that RV back in the driveway again. And if that happens within 36 months of our last action, we pick up right back where we left off. Each time that we give a successive citation with those monetary fines attached, there's a multiplier on that of 150 or 200%. So by the third time they get a citation, that can be 200% more than it was the first time they got a citation. And if it does fall within 36 months, we would just start right back where we were at the 150 or the 200%. And that effort has shown largely to actually have worked and keep people from reoffending as often.
And I can see that working really well for something that's hopefully mobile, like an RV. But what about something that's a larger issue, like a health or safety hazard on a home, for instance, or like a massive cleanup effort? What do timelines look like on something like that? How do you gauge this is going to take 6 months to a year to clean up, or how long do people have to clean up maybe more egregious violations?
And depending on the severity and the ability to affect those off of the property will be some of the main factors in which we'll triage how fast something needs to go. Also, secondarily, how competent that the property owner is in making those repairs. Are they going to have to hire out somebody? Are they going to be able to do it themselves? Do they have the money to provide that labor outside of themselves for the materials? But none of that, the law doesn't speak to any of that stuff, right? The law speaks to it must meet these standards, like you said earlier, black and white at all times. So we're looking at these things from an entire, like a holistic standpoint. We really want to see not only that the person that made the complaint, who's offended by those things that are in violation, but also anyone who could later in life be affected by the continuing maintenance of those violations, and the person who maintains those violations themselves who are living in those conditions. So it's a balancing act. But when it comes to the health and safety portion, we're going to really point focus in on what is going to cause the biggest offense to the rest of the neighborhood and or any hazards that could be mitigated by quick action. And then things that once we get to a point where we've mitigated most of the hazards, we give much more time and leniency for people to get the other things which wouldn't cause as much potential harm or hazard to the community. We'll give them much more time to take care of those.
Yeah. And if I can give an example, we recently had a code case that we did receive a complaint. It was this larger vacant property that had 2 to 3 structures, I believe, that were also vacant and somewhat unsecure. And it had been like that for a few years. It was previously occupied, and then the property owners were planning on developing it. And then that kind of fell through. And unfortunately, due to the attractive nuisance of the vacant property with the structures, there were some unhoused persons that were accessing it and staying on the property, causing other issues of just junk trash noise and things like that. And it was on a busy corner. And so after receiving a few complaints, we reached out to the property owner by notification by mail. And we were grateful that the property owner reached out to us almost immediately and had actually told us that they were considering demolishing all of the structures and making it just a vacant parcel and cleaning everything up. And receiving the notification from us actually helped them move a little bit quicker in that process because they were still in the process of deciding what they wanted to do. And so once they reached out to us to let us know that they were in the process of demolishing, we actually did give them a reasonable amount of time, which was about a month, to get with someone to hire and demolish the property, obtain the required permits, of course, and then pass final inspection. And so once that happened, they were able to demolish everything, get the property really cleaned up. And we received some notifications from some of the complaining parties and other people in the area that were grateful that it was no longer an attractive nuisance with those structures that were causing those issues. So we were grateful that the property owner worked with us in a timely manner. And we also were grateful that we gave the time and it happened to work out really well. And so when things like that can happen and we can give the education and tools and communication, that's an optimal code case that we can open and close in that time frame.
And if someone does receive a citation and they feel that maybe it's an unfair, unjust citation, or they might like to appeal that, is there an appeal process? And if so, how does that piece of the process work?
Yeah, on whenever someone does receive a citation, on the back of the citation, it does speak to the time that you are required to file your appeal. So there is actually a 30-day window from the date that the citation is issued that they have the time to appeal. If they do fail to submit their appeal within that time frame, at that point, the fine is immediately due and payable, and their right to appeal is terminated at that point. If they do submit their paperwork within that time frame, what happens is they are required to submit documents as well as the total fine payment to essentially have a deposit for a hearing date. Once they're able to submit all of the required paperwork within the required time frame, what happens then is they get calendared for the next available hearing date, and then their item will be brought to the Administrative Hearings Board, which is a 3-member volunteer board. And those are members of the community that essentially have background with some type of enforcement or government work where they have a little bit of familiarity with these issues. And then their item will be heard in front of this board, and they will have the opportunity to argue their side of the case as well as the city providing evidence of the case. And then ultimately it is the board's decision on if they may reduce the fine, dismiss the citation, deny the appeal, and uphold the citation. So it is a process that they have the right to do if they're able to meet those requirements and have their side of their argument heard to hopefully either have that citation dismissed or reduced or whatever the outcome ends up being.
Where does the money that's collected from the citations go? Because I think, Seth, I liked your point earlier where you said the intent here is not to punish the community, right? You're about education. And I think it's worth restating that this is not a money-making endeavor by the city. This is an opportunity to educate and keep things within the code.
This is not an opportunity for the city to make money. The fines that we do receive go into the general fund, and those monies end up helping everything within the city, be it streets, be it parks, be it more educational efforts, be it grants for people at the housing division. Yet the intent is that people will be able to fix their violations prior to ever being given a citation with a monetary fine.
I want to switch gears a little bit to the cannabis side of things, because I know that's another big piece of what code enforcement handles. And I guess my first question is, where does the line get drawn between code enforcement and RPD, Reading Police? Because I'm sure on either side of the cannabis issue, some are just handled by code enforcement, and then some probably have to be escalated to police. So where does the line get drawn?
Typically where that line gets drawn is how that was reported. We take different approaches, code enforcement and Reading Police Department. Typically, Reading Police Department takes the approach of a criminal nature based on some criminal information that they've received that could be incidental to other criminal incidents that are occurring. For us, it's about a nuisance abatement. So we're looking at it as it's a nuisance. Potentially, we've gotten a complaint from Reading Electric Utility that there is dangerously high usage at someone's house. Potentially, we've gotten tipped off by neighbors that there's, just the stinky cannabis odor all up and down, the street. Sometimes, we will be driving around neighborhoods, observe it ourselves, and move forward on that. We do very much collaborate with Reading Police Department whenever any of us do cannabis enforcement. If we believe so in code enforcement, if we're pushing it from that civil, administrative aspect as the public nuisance, if we, see there's any kind of potential danger or a need just to have, that civil assist, we'll absolutely ask for Reading Police to come and, join us on that inspection. Sometimes we do abatement warrants given to us by a Superior Court judge. When we're executing those warrants, a lot of times, those involve entry into a structure in which we've never been. We have no idea what kind of dangers may exist in that structure. Are there criminals that live in that house or whatnot? All we know is that there's potential illegal activity in there, and the judge has agreed with us. So a lot of times we'll work with Reading Police to help kind of secure the environment so that we make sure that we're only sending our city staff into a safe environment. And then we'll also work with Reading Police when they do get a criminal warrant on some cannabis violations, that we'll go in and we'll make documentation for them, and we will issue those same fines that we would issue if it was generated through our complaint process or not. And then we'll look at the conditions of the property to see if those conditions of the property need to be brought back up to standard as well.
There's a lot of property owners that will just grow a few plants in their backyard. And we find the cases that they're just really unaware that you cannot grow cannabis outdoors in city limit. You can, however, with getting it licensed and permitted, so you want to reach out to the city, do indoor up to 6 plants. So the biggest thing is people are just unaware of that with cannabis being legal, but within the city limits, you always want to check with your local ordinances and code. So it's always best to just call the city before you decide to do anything like that, because it's always best to educate yourself first rather than just assume.
And on the topic of safety, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, Seth, but how do you ensure the safety of your staff? I've got to imagine in these complaint issues, one side of the complaint is really pleased with you guys and happy to see you. And the other, the folks who are in violation, may be less than thrilled to see you or your officers. How do you ensure safety of that process?
We work with Reading Police Department through protocols that they've had in place to deal with potential people who may not enjoy being told that they have a warrant and we're going to be entering their private property. So we would very much defer to Reading Police Department's protocols on that. What's more in our span of control would be, once we get into the property, we're going to do a quick assessment of what could injure a person when we get in there. So are we seeing, very typical with cannabis grows, unpermitted and hazardous electrical, wiring all over, lights hanging from ceilings, not properly mounted. We walk in and there's chemicals, there's spills on the floor. Again, they're running utilities of some sort, water lines, electrical lines all over the floor. There's trip hazards. There are ventilation hazards as well. You walk in these places and largely they've turned single family homes into a filtered box to try to not let any of the incidentals to the cannabis grow, i.e. light or smell, to be observed by anybody other than themselves in that secure environment. And part of what makes a healthy standard dwelling unit is having ventilation and natural light. And a lot of times when we go in those, some of the first thing that we have to do is assess, where can we get that natural ventilation back into the building? Where are the fire hazards? A lot of times what we'll see would be like unpermitted gas furnaces put in, and especially in drying room areas. We'll see dehumidifiers, we'll see humidifiers. So we're looking for, is there a lot of mold in this room? Do we need to wear masks and Tyvek suits, proper personal protective equipment, whatnot? We sign out roles as to who's going to go in and look at certain things on our checklist to ensure that we're hitting everything that we've identified as what potentially could be a safety concern for anyone who's in that house during the execution of that warrant or that inspection.
I've heard folks, for example, who work in the movie industry, right? They have a hard time watching a movie as a pure viewer once they know the inner working to the behind the scenes. In the world of code enforcement, is it hard not to be, there's a violation, there's a violation, there's a violation? Or kind of when you're not at work with your code enforcement hat on, are you able to take a step back and maybe not focus so much on the violation aspect and more on just the beautiful aspects of Reading?
Yes, I am. I tend to put my blinders on a lot unless it's something that needs that attention. Maybe, and not often will I observe something that needs so much attention that hasn't already been observed by a community member and told to us. But yeah, I do. I try to really separate that out and just enjoy my time and overlook the violations if I can when I'm riding around town on my cycle as well.
Yeah. And that's a big thing for me. And when I'm at work, I have my work hat on. And when I'm not at work, I take the work hat off. However, there are maybe some things we may catch and follow up with on Monday when we come back into work, or just maybe see something and speak to another department and see if it's on their radar, or just also as a city employee and a resident here, if it is something that might be noteworthy, we again try to look at it from empathy and compassion. And if we've received a complaint on it already, or if it's something that might be an immediate danger, if it's noticed outside of work, there are times where it may be something that may be a note on my desk on Monday.
Is it challenging for your neighbors to live next door to you? I'm just trying to imagine if I had a code enforcement officer living next door to me, I might be more like, oh man, that tire's getting a little low. I got to put some air in that stat. I left some garbage on the side. Have you ever encountered things like that?
I don't think all my neighbors know what I do. I don't typically advertise it too much I think that would put me in a spot where everybody would be walking up and knocking on the door and complaining about everything. However, I do have some neighbors that do know what I do. And I have got where they said, hey, I noticed, in fact, the one that Amanda had mentioned earlier, My neighbor noticed that was torn down over off of Churn Creek and 44. There was a nuisance property there, and he was headed out to, I don't know, the eastern part of the county. And I saw him one day. He goes, "Hey, was that your doing over there?" And I told him, I said, "Yeah." And I got a nice thank you, a neighborly thank you at that.
And if I can hop in and say, when we moved to our neighborhood, I've lived in neighborhoods before that have had HOA. And me personally, on a personal level, I am a rule follower. So this job is a pretty good fit for me. And so where I currently live does have an HOA, which I do appreciate because I'm a pretty low key, friendly, quiet neighbor. And when we moved into where we are, we live in a planned community where our neighbors are a little bit closer to us. So we actually went around the first week we were there and knocked on our neighbors' doors and gave them our cell phone number just because we all live really close and parking can sometimes be an issue, and just said, "Hey, if you guys ever have an issue or questions, or you ever just want to chat or anything, we just want to we're available and here's our information." So we've really made a great relationship with a lot of our neighbors, and that's nice. And it's one thing too, when we first start receiving complaints or start getting contacted by complaining parties, our first recommendation or course of action that we always advise, if it's something on the more low level of a complaint, is have you tried just reaching out to your neighbor and saying, "Hey, would you be willing to move that?" Or, "Hey, that's blocking the sidewalk," or whatever the issue is. We always ask, have you tried to just make contact with them kind of in a friendly manner to ask? Because of course we don't want to get involved immediately, but if it's something that warrants that, we get a lot where they say, "Oh yeah, we've reached out to them a few times and they've just told us to kick rocks," more or less. And that's when we end up having to get involved. So I'm a big believer of that, of just making friends with your neighbors if it's possible, or just being neighborly in general, not being a nuisance to your own neighbors or neighborhood. I've always followed that code for my own self.
And in the spirit of community education, are there some frequently asked questions that you guys get really often that you could answer right here on the podcast for people?
We get a lot of complaints regarding civil issues, but civil issues between neighbors over property line. There's that old adage, good fences make good neighbors. And they also cause issues amongst neighbors. A lot of times no one knows who put the fence in when that fence starts to fail. So then they get angry at each other. They say, "You need to help. We need to split the fence. We hear a good neighbor fence," or "This person pays for that panel. This person pays for that panel," and so on and so forth down the line. A lot of times, some neighbors don't agree that, that fence needs replaced. So we'll get a complaint and say, "Hey, the fence is dilapidated. My neighbor won't help. We plan to fix this fence, but they won't help. Could you send them a letter and tell them they need to help?" And the answer to that's no, we just can't. It's not a requirement for a property to have that fence, right? So a fence that's in dilapidation, whoever typically would own that fence in dilapidation, we would consider both parties to be liable to fix that fence in dilapidation. Street parking issues are not enforced by the Code Enforcement Division. Reading Police Department will enforce all on-street or public parking issues. Code enforcement will deal with only the residential and commercial parking that takes place on private property. And like I said, most of the time, property lines are a huge complaint that we get that we just don't have the authority to enforce. Tree branches growing over property lines. This is another one. And there's a huge educational effort here that we undertake every time that we talk to somebody about tree branches over property lines. When those tree branches occur over your property line, they are technically your responsibility. They're your tree branches. But if you want to cut said tree branches, the tree branches that you do cut, you got to make sure that you can't poison or otherwise harm the tree, right? And that's why there it is, a civil liability. So what we just try to tell people, and just to go back on what Amanda said, is to know your neighbors, be friendly with your neighbors, be communicative with your neighbors. Before you cut those branches, those tree roots, you're going to fix that fence on that property line, reach out, speak to your neighbor, tell them what those concerns are, because we're not going to be able to help articulate an argument for you in that civil court when you're going back for damages.
And we understand when we speak with property owners, we also very much understand that there's just some neighbors that are less than friendly, or they just really don't want to work with their neighbor, or they just completely shut down and are no help. We very much empathize with that and understand that's a very tough situation. And in that regard, unfortunately, we still can't help in that. And that's why we really recommend them essentially turning to legal counsel, which is really what's going to be their best bet. And we understand that's not optimal at all. And in a perfect world, everyone would be able to work together and be neighborly because we're all living in close quarters or relatively close to each other. And everyone wants the same thing. They just want to live quietly and peacefully and enjoy their lives. But we also understand there's situations that doesn't occur. And so we're definitely aware that's not always the case if everyone can get along. So really at that point, is unfortunately when legal counsel would be your best bet to step in. Another thing that we see and enforce are unpermitted short-term rental. Some people don't realize that they do need to obtain a permit and pay transient occupancy taxes on those. And so again, if you're planning on maybe renting out your house for less than 30 days at a time, or it's a vacation rental or anything like that, it's always best to reach out to the city. The permit center, the business license center, they can all guide and help you in understanding what you need to do.
How do you both stay passionate and positive in the world of code enforcement? I've got to imagine, as you touched on it, it's not always roses, right? There's maybe some, with the complaints, there's some negativity that comes with that. Are you passionate about municipal code? Do you find joy in beautifying Reading by addressing some of these issues on a daily and weekly and monthly basis? How do you continue to stay passionate about the work you do?
I stay passionate because I love the city of Reading, and I love the fact that this city can thrive. I love helping people enjoy the city of Reading. Every day I get up, I have a 7-minute commute across town, and I don't run into anybody that tried to run me off the road. I feel that we've got a very nice community here. And every day when I get up, I deal with a ton of great, wonderful people, be it people that lived in Reading their entire lives to people that are just passing through for the day, people that may be interested in some sort of business activity and they've called to ask a question, to people who might at that moment just hate my guts because there's a violation in their yard and they got a citation for a couple $100. That's my motivation, helping all those people enjoy the city of Reading as much as I enjoy the city of Reading every day.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I would very much agree. I moved to Reading in 2021 and I love Reading. I very much utilize a lot of the bike trails around here. I'm able to get on one directly from my house. And so just living in a city like this that offers so many things just makes me even more motivated to help people that are experiencing nuisance issues or substandard issues and want them to experience to be able to live a happy, healthy life as well. And yeah, sometimes it can be a thankless job, but at the end of the day, I'm a very empathetic person where you never know what kind of day or life that someone's having. And sometimes people just want to be heard if they're experiencing a stressful situation or something that's just been bothering them for quite a long time that we can assist with. So when situations like that arise, it's always just coming from empathy and compassion and wanting to work with that person that falls within our jurisdiction, of course, but just letting them know that we're here for them to help keep Reading a beautiful city and a safe city and somewhere where we all want to work, live, and play.
I feel like I have a much more comprehensive understanding of what code enforcement is and why it is the way it is. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet today that you want to be sure we cover?
There are people out there that, they may have that question in their head of, is this okay? Or should I do this first? Or they're just unsure on whether it's doing work on their home, doing something in their front yard, just anything that maybe would fall under the city's eyes kind of radar. It's just always best to call first or reach out by email. And we're always happy to answer questions and help educate people on what may or may not be a violation, what may or may not be permitted. And again, that way we can work together and not have to move forward with enforcement process and be able to get that property owner or tenant into a direction that helps them educate themselves on what the proper process is for any type of thing that they would do, whether it be on their home or property, where we would end up getting involved.